All right, welcome to Sharks Talk 916, episode 16. We're calling it a November to Remember. I'm sure we didn't come up with that slogan, but we're reusing it here.
I'm going to take credit for it, even though I saw a lot of use of it. What was it, Sunday night when we played, or Saturday night?
So we're going to talk a little bit about just the month we saw, which, at the end of October, the discussion was like, oh, how long is Pete DeBoer going to be coach, and what's going on with the team? And then at the end of November, it's a totally different story. So we're going to discuss that a little bit. We talked a little bit about it last episode, but it didn't really get worse after we got off there, despite our both guessing that there would be a loss, which of course there was a loss, but not.
We predicted that game correctly.
Yeah, we predicted that game correctly, but it wasn't a collapse, right? The Sharks didn't lose one game and then just start a losing streak. So we'll talk a little bit about the rest of the month. We're going to talk about some stuff that's been in the news, just NHL wide lately. So not necessarily Sharks related, but we're going to talk a little about some coaching news. And then we're going to talk about the 11 forward, 7 defenseman strategy, which I think is an interesting topic of conversation. Actually, there was a lot of tweeting and commenting about it while it was running. So we're going to get into that a little bit. And then kind of just a look ahead in two ways. One, we're going to talk about Thornton and Marlowe and a look ahead of their careers, and then a look ahead for the team of the month of December and what they've got in store for them. So it's maybe a packed schedule. We'll see how quick we get through all of this. But just a reminder, Sharks Talk 916 is brought to you by Sports Talk 916. Sports Talk 916 is basically a podcast like we are. We use their platform actually when we do our live shows. They talk about every other sport but hockey that happens in the Sacramento area. So they talk about football, basketball, especially because of the Kings, and baseball, most of which bore the hell out of me. So I just do hockey. I shouldn't say that. I do enjoy other sports. I just don't necessarily want to do a podcast
about it. Yeah.
Yeah. But I recommend you check them out if you're in the Sacramento area or even the Bay Area and you are into those sports. They do a pretty good show. They're pretty funny guys. And please go on and chirp them as much as possible. I like to when I am watching, I like to make just tons of comments to try to piss them off while they're doing the show.
Careful what you invite to our show.
Yeah, don't come down to our show, though. Our show is serious. You can also check us out on Twitter, Sharks Talk 916, at Sharks Talk 916, sorry. We tweet during most of the games and occasionally when there's news or things that we just wake up and feel like saying. That's usually when you get a tweet in the morning. It's from me waking up and something popped into my head.
Yeah, I feel like you wake up earlier than I, even though you're 2 hours behind me.
Like, yeah, I wake up at 6 a.m. Pacific time is when I get up, and dogs fed by 6:30. Otherwise, it's upheaval in my household. So we know who's really in charge at this house. And with the baby on the way, it'll be the baby and the dog that are in charge.
We'll see how Chad looks on those podcasts once the baby arrives.
Yeah. Babies due first week of March. So tune in April to see how ragged I look after a month of raising a baby. If I'm still here and have time to do a podcast. So let's jump in, Nolan. So for those of you who don't know, I'm Chad. With me is Nolan. So the big news, or at least some of the big news that was going on in NHL as a whole over the last kind of week, I guess it started a couple weeks ago, but the story is really taken off this week, is kind of some coaching abuse scandal, I guess you want to say. Whether it's – did I lose Nolan? I think I lost Nolan. Okay, well, I'll just keep talking, and hopefully Nolan will come back, and then – oh, he's back. Hey, Nolan.
Okay. For some reason, it's only showing your video. I was trying to – there we go. Okay, I fixed it.
I see both now. I lost Nolan for a minute, guys. It was scary. I don't know how I was going to riff for an hour by myself. So we'll jump into the first one. So Bill Peters resigned in Calgary. Well, according to Nolan's notes, he resigns, but that's not correct. He resigns in Calgary after reports and investigation to some racist comments he made years ago. and some allegations of physical abuse on the bench. So I mean, to me, that one's kind of a no-brainer. Even we'll get into the physical side of it in a minute, but just the racist comment part. I mean, you just can't be that way. You can't be a coach and have players of different races and make racial comments towards them. That's going to get you kicked out. I don't care what sport you're in, especially these days. The second one was Mark Crawford, the assistant coach in Chicago, is under investigation for physical abuse of players on the bench, right? And some of those that I've read go as far as to say, I mean, that he choked players off, not on the bench but off the bench, gone as far as to choke a player, which is a pretty big, I think, pretty drastic step for a coach. So let's start. First off, do you think this is a valid discipline for these coaches for transgressions that, at least from what I've seen, were all in the past, years ago, right? Nothing super recent has surfaced.
I mean, it's an interesting dynamic. It reminds me a lot of the Me Too movement, where now that some people have come out and voiced, their concerns about things they're experiencing, now we're seeing more and more people come out, and the sort of social cloud that hangs over that is kind of lifting, and people feel free to speak now because Akeem Alou, a former prospect in the Blackhawks organization, who at the time his coach was Bill Peters, came out and laid out sort of the scene where Bill used some colorful language in the locker room regarding his selection of music that he wasn't particularly a fan of. And obviously those comments don't have any place in any sport or any environment for that matter. But it is interesting. I mean, I guess that's the nature of the business, that, something comes up in your history from 10 years ago. I mean, you just have to kind of live with it and own it and, improve from there if you get another chance, which is probably unlikely at this point. I could see him maybe coaching, I don't know, in some independent league or at a minor league level, but I doubt he gets another NHL job at this stage.
What I wonder if that's part of it. So I read a little bit more on this one when I saw it in the headlines, because it was interesting to me for some of the reasons you said, of like, how long ago was it and what did he say? I mean, I'm always curious what they said or what they did. But, we do tend to be, maybe this is showing my own bias a little bit, but we tend to be a little too reactive nowadays, that someone's accused of something and it's usually vague and then they're immediately blackballed. I like to know what they actually did or said before
There's a difference between accusations and fact. Although in this case, he didn't deny what happened. So
no, but part of what I read was that he didn't, like you talked about owning it, right? And he didn't apparently really come out and own it. His even description of the incident seems a little lower key than the player's description or even other players' descriptions of what happened. And so I think that's part of it too. I think if you come out and you say, hey, I did it, I think you've got a better chance of surviving if you're just honest with what happened and, hey, I was stupid, or, I don't know, everybody said stupid shit back then, whatever you want to say, whatever excuse you want to give for it. But in this case, he didn't even really fully own it. And I don't think it matters. Honestly, I think as a GM or an owner or whoever is making that decision, and it's probably a group decision, not necessarily one person, but I think that coach is out. I mean, I don't think you can keep a coach who is clearly
no. I mean, the PR of it alone, you can imagine the protest you would potentially have outside your stadium. I mean, if you have any African American players on your team, I mean, that is not going to go over well, knowing that you have a coach in there who's arguably a racist, or at least made racist comments. But Calgary themselves took a lot of criticism during this process because they wanted to do a thorough investigation and not rush to judgment, as you were kind of talking about. And a lot of people are like, you know what, he's admitted he did it. What are they waiting for? Just fire him. But a lot of the speculation was they were doing their research to try and void his contract so they didn't have to pay him. And then he ended up resigning anyway, so it's not an issue. They don't have to pay him now, but had they just fired him instead of trying to void his contract, then they could have potentially been on the hook for paying him the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing, right? That people don't necessarily understand is that when you're deciding what action to take in a contractual situation, it's not necessarily like hey, just do it, just fire the guy.
I mean, they weren't going to keep him, but they had to
Yeah.
their ducks in a row to try and
He doesn't have a union, so it's not quite like messing with a player where there's a whole union backing them, right? But he still has a contract, and you have to figure out what the proper procedure is in those situations. Yeah. Now, the one that I think to me is less, and maybe this is because I played sports, and I'm not that old, but when I played, this wasn't unheard of even in high school. But the coach is being quote unquote physically abusive, and that ranges, right? So the descriptions are anything from kicking a guy in the butt when he's sitting on the bench, which to me is like something I would expect to see happen. Maybe not at the NHL level when they're a professional, but certainly at lower levels. But then when you get into things like, the coach pulled me back and he choked me and, while screaming at me, like that gets a little, to me, that's too far, right? That's too much. Yeah. So what do you think? I mean, where do we go from here? I doubt there's very many players who haven't gotten a kick in the butt or, a pat on a stern pat on the helmet when they've done something stupid. Are we going to see that become a major thing, do you think? Or is there going to be more coaches? Is this just the tip of the iceberg like you were talking about the Me Too movement?
I think so. I mean, I think you'll see more and more come out. It may not be necessarily current coaches, but perhaps former coaches or that are now assistants like Mark Crawford is. And I'm curious to see how the NHL reacts. I'm sure they will try to enact some sort of rules or regulations to try and protect against it, whether maybe it's cameras on the benches so they can see, what's going on retroactively and to discourage any sort of behavior like that. I think that would be a good way to deter it. On the bench. Obviously, you wouldn't, be able to have cameras everywhere they are in terms of practice and locker room and that type of stuff. But during the game, I mean, that could be one potential option to try and dissuade some of that.
Yeah, and I guess my other question would be for you is just personally, where do you stand on it? Do you think something like a kick in the butt or, a slap in the helmet is necessarily a fireable offense or should be a fireable offense?
No, but I tend to think those are probably not isolated incidents. And if it's happening in one situation, it's probably happening in several other situations, probably to a worse degree. So if it's just a one-off, oops, I got pissed off and slapped somebody in the back of the head, then no, I probably wouldn't fire somebody for that. I would certainly fine them, maybe even suspend them. But chances are, I mean, where there's smoke, there's fire, right? Rarely is it just one isolated incident. Normally there's more to it than that. I mean, it's a pattern of behavior typically. Not always, but for the most part, I would tend to think so.
Yeah, I think it's just because of my own experiences. I mean, I have trouble saying a coach who gives a kick in the butt to a guy wearing pads or a slap in the helmet is necessarily abusing a player.
Yeah, I think for me, it's more just a lack of respect. Like, you're two grown men. Like, just tell him to his face how you feel. You don't need to physically assault him in the process.
And that was honestly kind of my surprise was, I mean, hockey players aren't known as small, right, weak guys. Like, I don't know if as a coach I would go up and even think to, I probably might kick one in the butt or pat on the helmet, but like to choke a player, I don't think I'd get into a real physical altercation with a hockey player.
Well, I think part of it is like coach is a power position, right? I mean, they have influence over your place on the roster potentially. So, and that's probably a large part of the fear speaking out is these guys don't want to be cut. And in fact, a couple of guys that did come out are claiming that, these coaches derailed their career, in terms of other actions they took as well. So I think it's probably mostly young players because of that. I mean, obviously, I don't think a guy like Joe Thornton would ever, first of all, I don't think he'd ever experienced that. But second of all, if he did, he sure as hell wouldn't take
I can't imagine DeBoer putting his hands on Jumbo in a serious manner, right? Like, I could see him thumping him in the helmet and say, come on, Jumbo, that was stupid. But I can't see him, like, grabbing Jumbo aggressively and getting away with that. It just –
Yeah.
So, I mean, it's not a laughing matter. Like,
no, it's not. I mean,
that picture is funny in my head. But anytime someone in a position of power like that, who does really, and you got a point that I didn't even think of. It's not just necessarily a roster position, but in some ways it's your career, right? They hold your career in their hands.
Yeah, I mean, coaches talk to each other, GMs talk to each other. I mean, it's a small world in terms of a professional sport. So,
well, and where you get traded or whether you get traded, I mean, that kind of stuff can, whether you even play, right? How long you're during your contract, like that kind of stuff can make a serious impact. So I understand why they wouldn't say anything necessarily during their playing time. But
yeah, I mean that's who controls whether you're on the ice and playing or not. So you want to try and have a good relationship as much as possible.
So, anyways, not Sharks related, but it's a topic that affects the NHL. It's kind of like we talk sometimes about player safety things or things like that. I think that it transcends just the team. It'll be interesting to keep an eye out and see what happens from here on out. If there's more accusations and if more kind of unravels, I do think that you are going to see teams make decisions quickly when accusations come out, especially because they got so much flack for how long it took them.
I mean, like Crawford got suspended right away until they put him on leave, whatever they want to call it, while they investigate.
All right, so let's transition to a happier topic. So the Sharks in November. I don't think either one of us would have predicted the record in November that we saw. What was it? 4 losses. All of
November? I mean 11-4 overall. Granted, 11-2 in their last 13. They started the month with 2 losses at home to Winnipeg and Vancouver, which we did a show after those 2 losses and kind of talked about it's now or never, and it's not looking too good. And then they reeled off, I think, 6 in a row after that.
Yep.
And then the nice thing is, well, the 2 games that they have lost, they've immediately responded with wins. After the Edmonton loss, they won 3 in a row, I believe. And then after this most recent Winnipeg loss, they've won 2 going into tonight. So they've responded well, even after dropping games.
And pretty gritty wins after the Islanders, right? Or sorry, the Oilers. So they lose to the Oilers 5-2, which we both kind of predicted, not just because the Sharks have been on a run and eventually they're going to lose, but also because the Oilers kind of had something to prove coming into the Sharks game. But the next game is the Sharks is Golden Knights, which is always a tough team for us, right? Win in OT. Then the Islanders, which is a tough team, win in OT.
Yeah, they had gotten points 17 in a row at that time. So, and they did get a point against the Sharks, but they won. So,
and then the Kings, which shouldn't have been as close of a game as it was, but
no, that should have been their first shutout of the year and a blowout. Instead, it turned into a lucky to win type game.
But again, I think that's the thing, right? How often have we seen them, go up 3-0 or go up 2-0, have the other team catch up, and then just give up, basically. But they played through. They won it in overtime as well. So 3 overtime games in a row. And you think, okay, at least me, I was like, they're exhausted. I didn't necessarily think the Coyotes game was going to go the way it did, just because they're running 7D. They're going into overtime. 2 of them were shootout, right?
And then they get behind.
Or sorry, no, none of those were shootout, but they get behind.
2-0 on the first 2 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I my household, it's hard to keep the game on when we get behind, because I'm not fully in charge of when we watch the Sharks and when we don't, or at least I'll go watch it in the room if I
wear the pants in the relationship.
I'm not gonna lie, I don't wear the pants in the relationship. She's actually she's been a Sharks fan longer, so I think she's had more of it at this point. But I mean, they came back, and they came back solid. They went from 2-0 to giving up no goals and winning out 4-2. So what do you in those past few games, especially because we had a show right before the Oilers game. So Oilers game on, what do you see that you like? What do you see that you think, obviously we still need to tighten up, or, what were worries that you had after watching?
Yeah. I mean, I think the themes are pretty much the same as last time we talked. I mean, in terms of negatives, the power play continues to struggle. On the reverse, the penalty kill has been fantastic. Probably has single-handedly won a couple of those games. Goaltending's been better. I'm not going to say it's been spectacular, although Jones did get third star of the week in the NHL this week rather. So goaltending's been better. Carlson and Vlasic have been pretty darn good. Burns and Shimek have not been very good, surprisingly. That pair has not seemed to gel like it did last year. But Vlasic especially has been really good. Carlson as well. The thing I was probably most impressed with was that they went 4-1 without Hurdle, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. I think they won the first 4 without him, and then finally dropped one, and then he came back.
Yeah, I think that's right.
I am concerned they might have rushed him back a little bit. I mean, he sat the entire third period against LA once that game was out of hand, and then against Arizona, he looked like he was still battling some bumps and bruises. So he'll be someone to watch closely tonight to see if he's still grimacing and a little bit slower than normal.
Yeah, and I think you're going to see him rest more when he can. So, if the game's pretty well in hand, I think you'll see either him not taking someone else taking his shift, which I don't know how much you'll see that, but definitely maybe just a little less playing time for that line, a little more for the fourth line, who's actually been kind of coming alive lately. They haven't been spectacular by any stretch of the imagination, but they've been more of what we need out of a fourth line, actually providing some scoring and some good play. I think.
Go ahead.
I think that for me, the biggest thing was Dell. As far as disappointments go, like I was hoping Dell would keep playing well. Because when he plays well, Jones seems to play even better. And so Jones
he had the fantastic game versus Vegas, Dell, and then sort of a lackluster effort versus Winnipeg, which the whole team was lackluster that game, but the second goal he gave up in that game was abysmal, as he would tell you himself.
Yeah. I mean, I don't think if you watch, it's kind of like we talk about all the time with goalies. It's not just the stats. You can't just look at numbers. You have to watch them play. And I think that definitely he gave up some goals that he shouldn't have given up. Jones, on the other hand, I think has been a lot better. Those goals were previously in the season, we'd see a soft goal. He seems to be making those stops now. And when he does get past him, it's something like a defensive breakdown that gives them just too big of an advantage for Jones to deal with.
Yeah, and I mean, his stats could be a lot better. And if you look at just the 2 LA games, like the one game they were ahead 3-0, and then all hell breaks loose. And then the last LA game, they give up a late goal, which is only 1 goal, but it still negatively impacts his stats. So he could have easily had 2 shutouts there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I don't know if I texted you or not, but I after the no shutouts, basically, like every game there's been a few games where he's been really close and then give up a goal. And are we ever going to see a shutout?
I mean, probability is yes. I don't think they've probably never had a season in franchise history without one. I don't know if any NHL team has, frankly, but I mean, we're 20, 30 games in now. So they're 15-11 too, so 28 games in. So third of the season, basically. But no, I mean, I would be shocked if they don't get one, even though sarcastically on my Twitter then I said that they're not going to. But
so talking about stats, Jones's for all of November was 0.90 save percentage, and I think for the last week was like 0.93. So when he got his third start, he was quite a bit higher than we've seen him. I mean, higher than 9.3 is higher than his career average at this point.
And 900 feels like a low bar to set, but him and Dell been stuck in the 800 so long that it's kind of I feel like a crescendo. They need to get past that, or a hill that they need to break through.
And it's just like I thought it wasn't all goaltending before, right? It was also defense that was the problem. I think it's not just defense that's gotten better in front of him that's the fix either. I think he's playing better. I think watching him in the net, he's got more confidence than he had before. He's making stops that he wouldn't have made before. And I'm glad to see that. I mean, it's we want to see that Dell from 2 years ago from the Cup run, not the Dell from most of last year, right? Or in the beginning of this year.
Jones or Dell or both.
Jones or Dell or both, yeah. What do you think? It's not on your agenda, but I want to ask. What are you putting the percentage at that Dell ends the season with us or gets through the season with us?
I mean, the fact that he didn't play on the back-to-back this weekend is interesting to me. I mean, it worked out, and Jones does have good numbers historically when playing on back-to-backs, but I mean, I think that's a sign that the coach doesn't have a ton of confidence in him right now. That being said, I mean, I think it depends heavily on his next couple of games because I don't see there being an immediate solution. And that's the other thing. I mean, we talked about it briefly a few weeks ago. I mean, I don't know that there's much out there realistically because with their limited cap space, you don't have a whole lot to spare. But I'll say 40%. Actually, I'll say 55%. Not because I think they have confidence in him, just because I think their options are limited at this point.
You think 55% that he's still there?
Yeah.
I see. I think before the back-to-back, I probably agree with you. I don't think they would be looking. It would be more something comes up that is a good idea. I think now they actively look, and I think when Doug Wilson starts actively looking, you've got less of a chance of sticking around. I don't know. I'm trying to think of who. The problem becomes who would they get, but if you look at teams like.
I mean, there's been a few goalies on waivers lately. Not that any of them are particularly attractive, but it's not uncommon for second and third goalies to get sent through the waiver wire because some teams have too many goalies.
Yeah. Was it Anaheim?
Typically, those guys don't have a ton of experience, so you're kind of rolling the dice. But
who are we talking about? Miller, right? So
Miller, yeah, which I think he has a no move clause, and supposedly he only wants to play in Anaheim. But yeah, I mean, if he's open to another California team, then he would be a good option, assuming the Ducks fall out of the race.
Yeah. So let's talk about that then. So that's one of the nice things about this November. We're in the race. I mean, we're not just in the race. We're technically in the playoffs. If today were to be the day that playoffs were decided.
It changes every day, right? Like I think the Sharks and Vegas have flip-flopped like the last 4 days, or at least the last 4 games they've played. They keep flip-flopping. Vegas is on a back-to-back. They're playing again tonight, so if they'll have to lose for the Sharks to flip with them again. But yeah, I mean, it's a tight race. If you look at San Jose, Calgary, Vancouver, and those 4 teams are separated by 2 points, and Arizona is only 3 points ahead of the Sharks, and then Edmonton, I think, is 5 or 7. They beat Vancouver last night. So, I mean, it's a very tight division race. So, I mean, you lose 2 games in a row, you're out of a playoff spot. You win 3 in a row, you're back in a top 3 spot in the division. So it's going to take another month like November for them to get in a spot where they have some security and breathing room, I would say.
I mean, yeah, just in the Pacific, LA's the only team that looks out of it. And even that's not – they could go on a run.
I get it's early in the season. You're not going to have that much separation yet. But, I mean, I would agree with you that LA is the only team that's completely – out of the picture as far as their division goes.
Yeah, but you got teams in the East that have 43 points, right? And the leader is the Oilers in the Pacific with 37. And then everybody below them is 34, 32, 31, 30.
The whole Western Conference is very jumbled up. And I don't think they're necessarily mediocre teams. It's just they're all sort of evenly stacked, I would say.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Which, I mean, kind of leaves the door open for a run despite what's been I guess you can't say it's been a rocky start to the season now, but what was originally a very rocky start to the season. The door's wide open in the West. There's not a dominant team. I mean, St. Louis, I think, might be ahead of Edmonton, but I never really pay attention to who won the Cup last year because it's very rare that you see a Pittsburgh situation happens where they repeat or even get back to the Cup. A lot of those teams miss the playoffs or go out in the first round. So for that reason alone, I'm not overly concerned about St. Louis. And then after that, like you said, it's sort of wide open.
And so, yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the October fears should be pushed aside some now, right? There was this really strong month. I think the other thing is the question of Pete DeBoer, not being the head coach. I think that no change would even be thought of at this point.
I would say that scenario is out the window unless they suddenly fall on their face again. By fall on their face, I don't mean lose 2 games like people on Twitter seem to think is a emergency. I'm talking, couple 5-game losing streaks, 6 or 7 in a row, something like that, which they have much bigger problems to worry about than DeBoer if that happens.
Yeah.
But trying to remember what I was going to say. Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, I was going to move on to the next thing, but I don't want to get excited, obviously.
That's what I was going to say. So speaking of not getting too excited, the one sort of caveat with November is 7 of those 11 games were at home. So you should have a good month. That being said, they won all 4 road games in the month, all against division teams, Arizona, LA, Vegas, and Anaheim, which, really, Vegas was the Arizona game was impressive too, I suppose. But so, the good news is, we won't skip ahead to this. We'll talk about December in a second, but December has a very similar heavy home schedule, fortunately. So if they can string another month together like November, they'll be in good shape.
All right, so before we jump ahead to that, let's talk a little bit about the honestly weird. I texted you when I heard it the first time because I really couldn't believe it. And you didn't even believe me, I think.
I didn't. When you text me, I'm like, what are you talking about that Heed's playing over a forward? Like, what are you talking about?
Yeah, so Heed played over Radil was the first time I noticed it. And so we went 7 D-men and 11 forwards. And my immediate thought, and I think what you said and what you see someone like Kurz talk about is like, what's that tell you about the confidence in the forwards when the coach would rather play 7 D-men and give some forwards extra shifts because he doesn't feel there's a guy that can be that 12th forward. How weird was that to watch? It was 4 games in a row, five games in a row. They ran that way, right? 4 of them they won.
Yeah.
Have you seen that before? I've never. You've watched hockey.
It's not
one game.
It's not unheard of. Coaches do it occasionally, but typically you don't see it that consistently. Granted, it only lasted 4 games, but usually it's a one-off type situation, where maybe you have a defenseman battling an injury, so you want an extra D-man, or you're short on forwards. In fact, I just saw that Chicago tonight is playing with 11 forwards and 6 defensemen. They're playing a man down because they have so many injuries that they can't fill the roster, and they don't have enough cap space to call up somebody else. So they're literally playing a man down.
That's rough.
So situations like that can happen. And I don't remember if it was Ron Wilson or Todd McCullough, but one of them used to do it. I'm not going to say fairly often, but every once in a great while. But definitely not, for 5 games in a row. And, I don't know how much of that was – do you think DeBoer was trying to send a message to Doug Wilson that, hey, I need some help on the 4th line? Or was he sending a message to the 4th liners telling them that they need to get their act together?
I think it's both, right? I think it's both. The thing is, he's been sending messages to the 4th line by shuffling them, and that hasn't done anything.
Yeah.
So I think that this was a call to Doug in the front office, just saying, "Hey, I'd rather play 11 guys at this point than play 12 with some of these young guys," and that sucks, And I actually saw the interview with Doug Wilson in the Athletic today. I don't know why I said Atlantic.
Yeah, I read that.
And he talked about. I think he's doing some projecting because he said we wanted to give the young guys a chance at the beginning of the season, and so that's why we didn't pick anybody up. But he didn't sound like he was too impressed with.
He started telegraphed that hasn't worked without saying it directly.
So I do think that's another place where you might see someone like Dell move if they can get someone as good as Dell and get a forward and move Dell and maybe something else. I don't know how that's going to work out because unfortunately, he's not worth a ton.
Right. He probably has negative value, honestly, at this point. But and the bright spot is, if it was a message to the 4th line, it seems to have worked. The last 2 games, they've gotten some good performances. Gregor scored his first NHL goal, and he looked fantastic in the Arizona game, it just goes to show what confidence can do for a young player.
After scoring that goal, he took on a whole new level of confidence for sure.
I mean, he had a couple of breakaways in the Arizona game. It's too bad he couldn't bury them. And then Gambrell scored a big goal in the Arizona game after being a healthy scratch for Suomela before Suomela unfortunately got hurt. He looked pretty decent in there. So they seem to have found a collection of guys between Gregor, Gambrell, Suomela, and Milker that could form I'm not going to say a good fourth line, but a mediocre or acceptable fourth line. Granted, they've been very good the last 2 games.
Well, just like we were talking, I guess I don't know if maybe Pete listens to our podcast, but we'd complained that Radil never gets put in the Pete DeBoer doghouse, which is kind of this thing we've made up as this famous place that certain players just are always in, and then other players seem to never go into it. Well, he's definitely been in it now. I mean, he was the first healthy scratch to say, you know what, I'd rather just play with 11 than have you play.
You're talking about not making it through the season. I don't think he'll make it through the season as a Shark, personally.
And that's what I was wondering is if that, you kind of beat me to my question. Do you think he's I don't know, can you trade him, or is he just –
He'd probably get waived. And then I don't think he would get claimed, so he'd probably go down to the Barracuda would be my guess. I mean, it's possible somebody claims him, but I'm highly doubtful of that at this point.
So
shown nothing this year.
So hopefully we see a good fourth line tonight. I'd like to see a few more points come out of that line. Definitely eat up, if nothing else, eat up some ice time and in the offensive zone, which they've been doing a better job of. Arizona game was a good example of that.
The big controversy with the 11 forwards, 7D thing was that it was burning out the forwards, right? I mean, Kane and Meyer were taking fairly regular shifts on the fourth line. I didn't particularly notice those 2 guys being extra tired, but I think it was more the amount of penalties they were taking. Granted, it's the chicken and the egg argument. Do tired players take more penalties, or are the penalties causing them to be tired? It's kind of
did we take any more penalties than we take normally?
Well, I mean, it was really bad there for the last 2 games. It's been better, but I mean, they were taking 5 or 6 a night there for a few games, which granted they lead the league in penalty minutes.
Yeah, it's like we're the most penalized
team. But it was even worse than normal. And then I thought people really blew out of proportion Couture's comments after one of the games where he said, yeah, we're tired. I don't know if it's because we've been running 11 forwards and people are like, oh, he's calling out the coach and he's specifically telling the coach that he's stupid. I'm like, okay, calm down, people. Like, he's just pointing out that they lacked energy tonight and he's speculating on what it could possibly be. Like, you don't need to read into it beyond that.
Yeah, I got some flack for it on a Facebook post, but I also think that, 3 overtime games in a row. I get that it's not a ton of ice time at overtime, but it's 3-on-3. There's a lot more skating. It's a lot of.
It takes a lot more out of you than a normal.
More out of you to have not just you're playing 11 forwards, but you're going into overtime 3 games in a row. You're just wearing guys down, and I don't think it's necessarily that isn't. I'm not second guessing Pete's decision. It definitely worked for a number of games. I'm just saying it's not surprising if you end up with tired forwards 4 games into that.
Well, and that's it. I don't think it's a sustainable strategy, right? I think you can do it, temperamentally once or twice here and there, like I've seen it done in the past, but it's not a permanent solution. I think Pete knows that. He was just going to ride it as long as he felt like he could.
I mean, as long as they're winning, he basically wrote it as long as they were winning, right? And then when they stopped.
A part of me wondered if they were just doing it to showcase Heed for a potential trade, because if they're not playing 7D, he's not going to play unless somebody's injured. But, I mean, even today in the pregame interviews, DeBoer was complimentary of Heed, which is probably the first time I've ever seen him be that positive about Heed. He's like, we got 7 guys playing really well, Heater included. So I don't know if they're building him up for trade value or if that's,
I don't think he's wrong, though. I mean, I think
the thing is, is he embellishing or is he being truthful as far as how he feels? I would hope truthful, but
yeah, I feel like he'd played well and then the ice time he got. And I think that did help also, rest some of the bigger defensemen, give them a little more time off the ice. If he can go out and he can actually play, then everybody gets a little more of a breather. Because we were playing
another option on the power play too.
Yeah, I mean, we're playing Burns and Carlson so heavily that I don't necessarily mind giving them a little more breathing time.
And it's the other last point I'll make on that is it's amazing what confidence in a player from a coach can do for you. Maybe try that out more often there, Pete, as far as he goes. But all right, so that was the 11D 7 forward. 11D, I keep wanting to say 11D. If they play 11D, then we really got something to talk about.
Yeah, we got issues if they bring up that many defensemen.
Like they step in and be like, I'm sorry, you can't do this. Like, all right, so the fourth line, we talked about that. So kind of I'm not going to say it's a random topic, but I was just kind of thinking about it the other day, especially with the start that Joe Thornton has gotten off to, which hasn't been a good start. I don't think anyone would argue that. He's got no goals, which, I mean, I get he's not a goal scorer, but still he tends to put up 15 to 20 a year. Only the 8 assists. And then Marleau, kind of on the reverse token, I guess you could say, was a huge injection of energy to start out. And certainly he's leveled off a little bit. But when I look at the two, I feel like Marleau has a lot more tread left on his tires at this point in his career than Thornton. Do you tend to agree with that?
Yeah, I think, and I don't like. I've read a couple of articles talking about Jumbo specifically, and there's a pretty big consensus growing that this is probably his last year. The amount of maintenance time he's getting, and the amount of the quality of play you're seeing out of him. And it's not that he's not getting up and down the ice, because he is. He's not scoring. He's not getting scores into position like he used to. I think he's just getting old, man, and it sucks. I mean, he's had 2 knee surgeries. That's the big difference too between the two of them, right? How many times has Marleau been injured?
Yeah, I mean, none that we're aware of. No major injury that's kept him out, right? I mean, he had the longest games played straight for quite a while. And to your point about Thornton's surgeries, I mean, that was kind of I'm not going to say it was an excuse, but the justification the last few years for his slow start, and he did get better as the year went on. This season, from all we know, he had a normal offseason, but we'll see. Maybe it is just another slow start. Hopefully that's all it is, but their returns have not been promising so far. I think focusing on Jumbo more specifically real quick before we talk about Patty, I mean, I agree with you. I think it should be his last year. It's just going to come down to, is he willing to hang it up? I think he should continue to play, but he very well might.
I think you offer him an assistant coach position. I think you give him a chance to leave being a player, but stick with the Sharks, right? Keep the voice in the locker room, keep him around the team. You find something. I mean, I certainly think he's qualified enough to be an assistant coach.
He is. I think he'll definitely be involved with the Sharks organization, like they do with a lot of the alumni, Doug Murray, Dan Boyle. They're always back for charity events and things of that nature. Maybe even involved in the front office in some aspect. But I don't know if I see him being a coach, just because I feel like it would kill him to not be on the ice. And I feel like he probably needs to disconnect himself from the game to not miss it. I feel like he needs to get completely away from it for at least a little while. But we'll see. Maybe the coaching comes back after that. But
yeah, I also think it'd be tough to coach guys you played with. Like, I think that would be a little.
I mean, if there's ever a guy that could do it, to your point, I think Jimbo could because of the respect. But yeah,
I think to some extent he already does it, right? I mean,
he is a coach right now. I would agree with that.
I just don't. I can't see him playing more. I mean, he's already third line center, and he's not really performing the way you want a third line center to perform. So if he comes back next year, you're talking, are you going to put him on the fourth line?
Well, that's what I say. If he wants to play, do you offer him a job, or do you give him the Marleau and Pavelski treatment and say, sorry, Joe, we're moving on?
I think the difference is if he wants a job, I mean, he'll take whatever you want to pay him. Of
course, they said that we have a job for him as long as he wants to play. But to your point, I mean, if he wants to come back, it's going to be in a fourth line role, I think. I don't think they can have him as a third line center after this year, unless he shows dramatic improvement.
Yeah, I think if he takes $700K to play fourth line center, I think they'd sign him if that's if that's the agreement the two of them, the two sides come to. I think that's, and I mean, who do we have?
Well, that's what I was going to say. It's not like we're overloaded with fourth line talent this year. So
I think the problem is if you're getting to the point where if you're playing Jumbo, you're not playing somebody else. You're not developing another guy to play that position. So it's kind of like signing Marlowe, where we did it because we didn't have anybody to fill that spot.
Okay.
That's one thing.
That happens with Jumbo next year. We'll see. Although I don't know. I don't think Jumbo's the type that would be willing to wait, but we'll see. But I think it should be his last year. I just don't know where his head is at, so I'm not going to say that he's done, because ultimately, if he wants to play, he'll find a job somewhere.
And I'm not somebody who ever wants Jumbo not on the Sharks, right?
Yeah, we should be very clear about that. Like, there's no one I love more than Joe Thornton and respect more. I'm just looking at it strictly from an objective point of view. Like
now switching to the other side, Patty, I don't know. I mean, I think he's
got at least another year in him. I don't know if it's with the Sharks, though, is the question.
He's not a superstar, right?
No.
I think if he plays, it's with the Sharks, only because he didn't have any interest in playing anywhere else.
Yeah, it's not going to change on his side, and I mean, they already sort of rejected him this year until they got desperate. So I don't know. I don't know if he wants to go through that again. Like, I mean, he talked about how difficult this offseason was for him. Does he want to subject himself to that again if they get to the end of the year and they're like, "Hey, Patty, we're not sure what we want to do. Like, we'll let you know as we get into training camp." I don't know if he wants to go through that again. I think he'll want a more immediate answer from the Sharks, given how it transpired this offseason.
Yeah, again, though, I think cost comes down to it, right? If he's willing to play for what he's playing for, I think it's an easier decision.
Yeah.
It's an easier choice. He's not asking for 3 years. If he's not saying, I went 3 years at $4 million a year, it's a different conversation than it was when he left.
They have roster room for both of them if they both want to come back. I think that's where it starts to get difficult, because you're tying up a lot of spots at that point. And I know right now it looks like they're thin up front, but things can change dramatically from one season to the next.
I think the thing about Patty that why he looks so good is one that they had discussed earlier, which is he's a guy who's been amazingly resilient in his career. I mean, maybe it's lucky, maybe it's just that he takes care of himself, whatever. He's kept himself. Huh?
I would say, I mean, he takes good care of himself. He doesn't play an overly physical game. Jumbo's a big guy, so he gets beat up on quite a bit. But in that same article I read, the Doug Wilson interview, when he asked the same question about having Marlowe and having Jumbo on the team, he talked mostly about Marlowe, and he talked about his work ethic and how much he puts into conditioning and training, and how hard he works in the offseason to keep himself in shape and in the conditioning. Well, I mean, look at it. He hasn't played a freaking preseason game. He comes in and scores 2 goals. I mean, sure, that speaks to his skill level as well. But, I mean, you can't just jump in off the street and score 2 goals if you're not working your ass off.
So I agree. I think the reality is I think Jumbo is gone at the end of the year, whether it's they tell him, hey, we just don't have a spot for you, or it's a mutual decision that it's time for him to hang up his skates. I think Marlowe may be back for 1 more year. But, I mean, at that point, to me, it's only to chase records, because there's certain records he can't possibly get unless he plays another season. Like,
that was a comment that Babcock made, right? Who just got fired in Toronto. That's what he gets for saying that. And Marlowe came out pretty defensively against that, so that has nothing to do with it. I mean, I really do believe that he just wants to win a cup because he hasn't won one.
Sure.
Jumbo. So I don't doubt that at all. And I do think, I mean, sure, the Sharks are not front runner cup contenders at this point, but they have a, I'm going to say maybe not a legitimate chance, but they have a chance every year to do it. You just never know. I mean, no one would have probably thought that, St. Louis would have won the cup last year, especially definitely not in January. So you never know.
And maybe that's a decision maker for them. I mean, maybe where they end up at the end of the season and looking at the team and saying, is it really plausible that we go to the cup, next year, will help them make that decision. Because I think Jumbo knows, and he's, he jokes a lot about how you're basically have to drag him off the ice, but I think he knows it's a limited time you get to play a sport like that professionally, and
It'll be interesting because I think at the same time, like he's also one that where he feels like if he's not playing at the level he should be, he's not going to embarrass himself out there. Which he's not embarrassing himself, but
no.
for his standard, he might feel that way.
What if he thinks he's holding the team back in some way? I think he's done.
I could see him playing potentially in Sweden. He played in Sweden during the lockout, and he's talked about wanting to go back there and play again. That's where he met his wife during the NHL lockout. And I think they spend a lot of the offseason there, so it wouldn't be surprise me if the Sharks say, and he feels like he's done the NHL. He could go play in Sweden. Yager's still playing overseas right now at 45, 48, however the hell old he is now. So I could see Jumbo doing something like that if it's something where he just can't give up hockey. So
yeah, and honestly, Yager and he would still be great players over there. Put them together on a team.
Mm-hmm.
I do think no matter what, they both retire from the NHL as Sharks. I can't see Marleau going through all of the stuff he went through to come here to pick up and next year go to another team.
Yeah, I think you're probably right. It's just going to be an interesting dynamic for both them and Doug Wilson to cross that bridge and decide whether they have a spot for him or not. So,
and if you've seen Marleau's wife's Twitter feed, like she seems to love the fact that they're back. So I can't imagine.
She was a big driving force behind that for sure. It's family in general. I don't want to leave the impression that, the wife forced him home. Not at all. He wanted to be home as well. But, his kids grew up here. They went to school here. It was a big, uprooting to move them to Toronto. So,
all right. So let's talk about the team as a whole in the next month. So December's, while, as you said, there's a lot of home games. I think it's going to be a rough month. It's going to be a really, I think we're enough games in, and this is going to be enough of a challenge that I think this may be kind of a defining month for them as far as how's the rest of the season going to go? How are they going to end up? Because there's some really big games they are going to go into. And even if they don't win them all, if they're competitive in them, I think that says a lot about their chances this season. So you want to talk a little about the games that are coming up?
Yeah, I think tonight in particular is a big game, definitely a litmus test type game, as they call it, against Washington, who's one of the best teams in the league. Washington is without Nicholas Backstrom, one of their best players, but they're still a formidable opponent. And I think it's important because they're about to go on a tough 4-game road trip through 4 pretty good teams, or at least playoff contenders in Carolina, and then a back-to-back in Tampa and Florida, and then finish up in Nashville, which I'll be at that game on Tuesday. So it's a tough road trip coming up. And if you drop this game, then you're going into a tough road trip where you might drop 2 or 3. You could fall right back into 4 or 5 points out of a playoff spot. So I think tonight is big because that road trip is not going to be easy. That's 4 pretty good opponents.
Yeah. You're talking Washington's top of the Metro, right?
Yeah.
Carolina, I think, is actually better than they're ranked, but I picked them
Tampa Bay is far better than their record.
Tampa Bay is far better than their record.
Florida was picked as a dark horse this year, and then Nashville's always a good team, even though they've struggled a little bit this year.
So yeah, and Panthers are second in their division. I think
those are games that you circle and go, oh, this is a game we should win. Those are all tough road games.
Yeah, and I think the thing about those games is, like I said, I think if you're competitive or you win some of those games, which I think we can win some of those games. I'm not predicting we lose them all.
Yeah,
but you're talking. Okay, who are we going to see? Who would we see in a cup final if we got to the cup finals? Well,
that's at least a couple possibilities there. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Nashville you're going to see in the playoffs, and I think Carolina and Tampa Bay and Florida, you're going to see 2 of those teams. I think at least as contenders for the cup. So, let's show that we can beat those teams and kind of set aside any real worries about what's going to happen once you get in the playoffs.
Yeah. And then the good news is after that 4-game road trip, they're at home the rest of the month until New Year's Eve, which is pretty incredible. A 7-game homestand, although it's kind of weird. That homestand is spread out between the Christmas break. So they got a couple back-to-backs, which makes it less of an advantage, but still 7 games at home, just like they had 7 games at home they had 11 games at home in November, ended up going 7-4, 7-2 the last 9. So that's a big opportunity to sort of, I mean, you're not going to clinch a playoff spot this early in the year, but certainly to cement your status as, in a good position moving forward.
Well, and you've got Vancouver, Arizona, and Vegas. I mean, you got LA, but LA's not. I'm going to just count LA out now. I know I shouldn't, but
no, you shouldn't. They suck.
I don't think LA's a.
I mean, you asked Dowdy and Andre Kopitar, they'd count themselves out. Let's be honest.
Yeah. Right. So, I mean, I'm not going to. Not that we shouldn't beat LA. Those are just points I'm assuming we're going to get, and points that we should get. But beating Vancouver, Arizona, and Vegas would be a big deal for us with how close the Pacific is. And
a lot of division games this month, so those are going to be critical for sure.
And I'd even love to do it without giving them any points. Not that I don't love to see a good shootout, but I'd like to see actual 2 points out of those games to put a little distance between some of those teams. Hey, Steve, our number one fan showed up. Our only fan showed up. Came a little late, but that's okay.
We'll try to do later shows moving forward because I know those of you on the West Coast are probably still commuting home from work. So,
yeah, those of you that commuted today for work, unlike me who worked from home, so I just had to change rooms.
Commute down the hallway.
But
how about, I guess we'll end on predictions for tonight?
Predictions for tonight. I'm gonna give us a win. I'm gonna say we win, but I think it's gonna be a tight game. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if we give up the first goal and have to fight back a little bit. But let's say I'm gonna say 4-3.
I think they start hot tonight. This year, when they've had a couple of days off, they tend to come out guns blazing the first period. The challenge has been whether they scored despite dominating that first period. So I think they know this is an important game with a big road trip coming up. They've had a couple of days off. Granted, they did have a back-to-back prior to that. But I think they start fast and then hold on the rest of the way, like has been the theme much of the last couple of weeks. I agree with you. It'll be a high-scoring game. Washington's got a lot of firepower, so I'll say 4-3. Is that what you said as well?
Yeah, I said 4-3. Yeah, I just think. I mean, and that's not just a Sharks thing. That's becoming more of an NHL-wide thing, really. Like 4-3 games, 5-4 games. Like those aren't rare anymore.
There's been a lot of comebacks, a lot of blown leads. So I mean, certainly the Sharks have not been immune to that either. But it's a league-wide thing. So
either we'll stop not have a blown lead if we start out in the lead, or if we start out behind, then we will create a blown lead.
I feel like it's going to be one of those seesaw games where, Washington keeps coming back and then we finally get the last goal, but we'll see.
Who you're calling for first goal tonight?
So I have pretty good luck this year. I don't enter that contest every single game that they, put out there, but of the ones that I have entered this year, I've gotten it right 3 times. Haven't won a signed puck, though. So, Steve, maybe but I'm not convinced they actually give pucks away because I've never known anyone who actually got one. But putting that aside, my own personal complaint, I'll go with Kane. He's due. He hasn't scored in quite a while. He's gone like 7 or 8 games without a goal.
I'm going to go – is Hertl back?
Yeah.
Hertl playing? I'm going to go Hertl. Mostly because, I still think he's, when healthy, the best forward we have on the ice.
Agreed.
And so I think he's also gone quite a while without really scoring. So I think you'll see him come back and try to show he's healthy by putting the puck in the net. And in fact, I'll go as far as say Hertl will score 2 goals because he rarely scores just one. It's a weird thing.
True.
When Hertl scores, he tends to always have a good night. So Steve said that someone posted they met Ovi at Starbucks. Was it today? Because maybe he's tired, and then that'll just be an advantage for us. He's trying to get some caffeine before he headed to the rink.
Marlo is known to go for coffee before every game.
Sure.
Phil's Coffee in the Bay Area, which you probably know from living down there. So.
Yeah, I'm sure they all probably sleep in and then grab coffee when they get up. Oh, he does know. Steve does know someone who won a puck, of course.
What is possible?
If Steve didn't know, then I would say it's impossible.
Here's the thing: the ones I had this year was Sorensen, who I'm sure not many people picked. LeBanc, not super popular, and the other one was more common. I think I had Couture, Kane, but still.
Actually, I think LeBanc. I'll bet LeBanc gets picked more than Sorensen.
Oh, for sure.
People love LeBanc, but you got to also think how many fans are making a pick.
I know. When it was Sorensen, I'm like, okay, I actually got a shot this time because not that many people could have picked him. Maybe some folks in Sweden or something. But
just if you want to win one, you pick Dylan every time, and then you just wait for it to happen, and you'll be the only name.
You'll have one chance every 2 years for the one goal he scores. Yeah.
I wonder if Pickles gets picked much because he's been scoring more lately. Like he's been more offensive, but how many people think he's going to score a goal as the first goal of a game?
I mean, he has quite a few fans. It's kind of funny. I was looking at it the other day. He's got 4 goals. Carlson's only got 3. Burns only has 5. He's almost got as many as Burnsy. So, hey, more power.
Yeah. It's just when you move to that assist column that it becomes a much different story.
Lopsided, but
yeah, because he's also got 4 assists, so he's not doing a ton out there. But it's good to see him, out of his funk. I'm a huge Vlasic fan, and I feel like he's finally shaken off whatever was bugging him.
I mean, Hedigan posted on Twitter today. He was a plus 14 in November, I think.
Yeah.
So
how ridiculous of a turnaround, right? From negative, what was he like, negative 12, negative 13 at one point to plus 14.
Yeah.
And again, that stat's not the best stat, but I think when you're talking defenseman, it's a valid stat to bring up.
Well, and to Hetty's point, because somebody on Twitter gave him crap about using that stat. And it's like, okay, if it's that dramatic of a difference, you can use that stat. Like,
sure, it's a 20-something point swing, I think.
Right. I mean,
that's an improvement.
It doesn't take rocket science to figure out a guy's playing better. So.
All right, well, that's all we got tonight, I think, right?
Yes, sir.
Got to get ready. I got to cook dinner and then get ready for the game. So, thanks for joining us on Sharks Talk 916. If you came in late, Steve, feel free to go to the beginning or, listen to us in a day or two when it shows up on the podcast on your favorite podcast program. Do people use things other than iTunes? I'm an Apple guy, so what's the other one? Spotify, I think, has it too, right? Yeah, there you go.
I'll have to check the producer.
And then check us out at Sharks Talk 916 on Twitter. I think we got one more follower the other day. So
like 6 or 7. I've been very proud of those 6 or 7. I was going to set a goal. I would like 100 followers by the end of the season, but I don't know if we're going to get there. So
if we get 100, I'll definitely continue doing this. If we get 100 by the end of the season, then I guarantee more Sharks Talk 916 next year.
Followers, is that a thing?
Do what?
Can we crowdfund followers? Is that a thing?
Sure. Everybody go out and find 3 friends and have them follow us.
What's the crowdfunding website?
GoFundMe.
Yeah, we'll do a GoFundMe for followers. Is there a website for that?
Yeah, we should set up a Patreon, and we'll only do shows if people pledge to pay us for every show we do. And then we'll just never do a show again. Because no one will pay for that. All right. Anyways.
Don't look it up. Just saying. All right. We will wrap on that thought.
All right. So check us out at SharkShark916 on Twitter. We tweet about hockey, I promise, not other topics. And then you can always catch us on Facebook sometimes. We post. Well, we always post when we're going to have a show. So if you want to keep tabs on that, Sports Talk 916 Network, we post on there. Other than that, anything you got, Nolan?
Nope. See you guys in probably 2 weeks. I'll be at the game next Tuesday, so probably rejoin you the Tuesday after that, assuming schools cooperate. And I hope everybody had a great Thanksgiving. I'm going to go throw out turkey that we didn't finish because, I mean, nobody likes it. I only eat it once a year. Yeah. Anyways, take it easy, guys. Enjoy the game tonight, and go Sharks.